And with thousands of our forces still stationed overseas, many military families are watching the ramped-up rhetoric from North Korea very closely.
It's something that all Arizona families should be talking about right now, because more military leaders say if we go to war, it is highly likely we'd have to bring back the draft. Nicole Kreitz has the story you will only see on 3TV.
Greetings from the President of the United States. Your friends and neighbors have selected you to represent them in the armed forces of the United States.
Jeff Mellinger was 19 when he got a letter.
The return address was the White House, Washington, D.C., and that was before zip codes.
That changed his life.
You are hereby ordered to report for induction no later than 0700 hours, 18 April 1972.
He left his job laying drywall to join Army Jump School. And instead of doing his time and getting out as fast as he could, he re-enlisted and joined the elite Army Rangers. He served nearly 40 years, rising in the ranks to retire as Command Sergeant Major in charge of Allied forces in Iraq.
I loved it, and I miss it every day. My knees and back may not, but I do.
He survived 27 roadside bombs in 34 months in Iraq and retired 6 years ago, the last enlisted draftee in continuous active duty.
39 years, 8 months, and 13 days.
So will he truly be the last?
Since the draft ended, is now the first time with what's happening in North Korea that you've considered it might be time to bring that back?
If something seriously happened on the Korean Peninsula, end of the day, you can only fly so many airplanes and launch missiles, and then what do you got to do? Somebody's still got to put their boots on the ground. Can the all-volunteer force do it? And stay in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria and the 32 other countries around the world that were doing humanitarian missions or whatever.
He said he'd support reinstating the draft if our military needs it, and that's not all.
You also seem pretty adamant that if we bring back the draft, it can't be just men 18 and over.
I think if you have a draft to do anything other than draft men and women, you are speaking with a forked tongue.
He served with the first female 4-star general and says times have changed.
With the exception of the people who are serving now, America doesn't have any skin in any of the games we're playing.
With a skyrocketing budget for benefits and reenlistment bonuses and less than 1% of Americans serving in our all-volunteer military, Mellinger says a draft might eliminate a lot of public apathy. He says while current events often seem as if the worst to come is unfolding before us, history is the best perspective.
The draft is not a new thing. There were riots in this country over the draft during the Korean War. You could buy your way out in the Civil War. You could pay for one of your employees to take your place.
Mellinger says the way we fight wars today would get around a lot of the old exemptions.
And even people with physical problems can sit behind a keyboard these days, so maybe those deferments would change.
Considering the course his life took, how that draft letter he didn't ask for molded him into the leader he became, he says it's all about embracing your unseen potential.
This country is full of residents and some citizens, and the difference is citizens give back, residents just take.
Whatever unfolds, he hopes it will spark a conversation for people to be more involved, intentional, and appreciative.
Whatever it is, everybody ought to do something, because that gives you an appreciation for the things you have and the things you benefit from.
Nicole Kreitz, 3TV.
Certainly something to talk about. And in our history, there have been 4 drafts, all of them in the 20th century. It started with World War I when 2.8 million Americans were called to service. The largest draft, let's see, of course, was in World War II when 10 million Americans were drafted. And then in Korea, you have about 1.5 million Americans drafted. And of course, the Vietnam War when 8 million Americans were drafted. Right now, there are 1.4 million active troops here in the U.S. Arizona Senator John McCain fought to amend last year's National Defense Act to require women to enlist in selective service. And while the Senate passed it, the plan was ultimately shot down.
Tonight, the U.S. has gone to the UN in response to North Korea's latest nuclear test. The UN Security Council has passed a watered-down package of sanctions from what the Trump administration had been pushing for. So it does not include banning all oil imports from the country or freezing all North Korean assets. Less harsh sanctions were necessary to get China's vote.
North Korea's neighbors, its trading partners, and the entire international community are united against its dangerous and illegal actions.
North Korea has warned of a harsh response against the U.S. for pushing these new sanctions.